Okay, and welcome everyone to today's Big Data and BI Best Practices webinar, brought to you by Actian and Yellowfin. This is a pretty exciting topic. It's a very big topic, and at the moment, certainly a lot of conversation in the BI space around big data and how it fits into our organization. So in terms of today's presentation, the first thing you'll notice, there is a question and answer panel on your GoToWebinar application. If you've got any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to post them there, and we will get them at the end. So as we take you through the webinar, from my perspective, you will be hearing from me, Glenn Raby, the Yellowfin CEO, and from Fred Gallagher, who's the General Manager Actian at VectorWise. So we'll be taking you through. I'll do a short introduction, and Fred will take you through some of the best practices around big data and thinking about how you would implement that in your organization to achieve fantastic and amazing BI outcome. So a little bit about Actian and Yellowfin. So we've had a relationship between our organizations for quite some time now, and what we're seeing from our customers is a great fit. So Actian has, with their VectorWise product, really lifted the benchmark in terms of performance for analytical databases. And Fred will talk to that in particular. But if you're looking at this chart here, you can see just what a massive difference the landscape has happened in the BI landscape since VectorWise has come on the market. The performance is absolutely outstanding. And I think in that sense, Actian are really well positioned to talk about big data and its use in organizations, and some very, very interesting case studies that we'll touch on today. From a Yellowfin perspective, we've been rated #1 by Howard Dresner's Wisdom of Crowd study in terms of #1 BI product globally. We've been rated #1 in mobile BI. And so from our perspective, we're very much interested in the way people use data, the way people access and consume information. And so when thinking about BI and big data, ultimately we're thinking about the combination of the two. We're thinking about how do you manage large and vast amounts of data, but how do you make that consumable and usable for end users? And really that's what we want to get at the heart to today. In terms of big data, and I suppose the interest in big data, it sort of comes around this great quote that data is the new oil. And I think organizations are starting to look at information a lot more strategically than they have in the past. So we have had some significant changes, and we're seeing organizations that not only use data internally to maximize the performance of their organizations, but who also look to monetize that data. So do I have information that is valuable outside of my organization that I can sell? And some examples of that would be, for example, real estate data. So if you manage and track sales of properties, then there's value in that. There's value in selling that into the marketplace in a way that's easy to consume. Organizations are looking at, not just how they use their own data, but how they can actually, for themselves, but how they can monetize that and how they can go external to that. And that's where this value of data is coming in. And really, when we think about it, and we think again, why the conversation around big data, we're seeing so much more data being collected. It obviously comes up in a lot of these types of conversations. But to bring the point home is that we're seeing this really exponential growth in data collection, and that comes from the growth in sensors and all the technology that's new and that's out there that is allowing people to capture and store information in a way that was never done before. And so we're basically putting sensors on everything. So if you think about it simply data from your mobile phone, if you've got a smartphone, the amount of data that's being collected from that device by the multitude of apps that you use on that device is quite astounding. So the question then is, how do we use that? What do we do with that? And that's really becomes the challenge of big data. But having said all that, data's ultimately always been there. We've always had access to vast amounts of information. But the reality is that over the past 5 years or so, there's been some really fundamental shifts in technology. By this, it means that the cost of capture and storage has reduced significantly. So in the past, typically organizations would really vigorously throw away their data, so they'd only keep what was really needed for their fiduciary obligations, etc. And so they stored the minimum amount of data they could because of the high cost of storage. That essentially is gone. So organizations now are much more willing to store far larger amounts of data. So now, having stored that, again, in a traditional model, we would have gone to a lot of effort to aggregate that up and make it usable from a reporting perspective. And so in this aggregation process, not only is there cost associated with that, do you have to go and build data warehouses, etc., but you lose value in that, because as soon as you aggregate, the end user actually loses something. They lose the capacity to drill down to minute detail, to slice and dice, etc. And so now we've got big data technologies, database technologies that allow us to slice and dice this vast amount of data at lightning speed. And I think that's really what the change is. So we're now in a position from a technology point of view that we can actually make use of this data, that we can do something really fundamentally different with it than we did in the past. And how is it different? If you think about some of the big data solutions out there, and again, what we want to bring it down to today is thinking about the general organization. So yes, there is Planet Google. There are use cases in big data that are huge and vast and incredibly complex. Then we have examples of large telcos who still have huge amounts of data that they manage, and also very, very complex given all the different platforms that are managed in the telco, from web to mobile devices to landlines, etc. And then lastly, there's the average organization. And so you've got to think about, ultimately, from your perspective, where you sit, what is the big data story that you're trying to tackle? And so some of the conversations that we'll have today and some of the points we're talking about is really about thinking about what's specific to your organization, what's important to your organization, what mix of products, from whether it be Hadoop or NoSQL or analytical database, where does that fit within the story that you need to tell within your organization? How does it work for you? And I think we're often talking about, from a sort of hype perspective, we're often talking about the kind of solutions that Google tackles. But ultimately, the cost and complexity of those solutions don't fit with most organizations. So, do you have a big data problem? So, in thinking about big data, one of the things that's often used to describe big data is the 3 V's, the volume, variety, and velocity. And so if we think about it, from a volume perspective, it's pretty obvious. It's how much data you're collecting. Do you have terabytes, petabytes of data? How many records are there? You're keeping transaction level information. So what level, what is the volume in your organization? And often, at a simple point of view, is that if you've got more volume of data than you can currently handle in a timely fashion, then ultimately, to some degree, you've got a big data volume, you've got a big data problem. So even if you've only got 100 million records, if you've only got infrastructure that doesn't support you to slice and dice that effectively, you've got a big data problem. The next piece is the variety component. So, how much different types of data do you have there? How much do you want to be able to use and have access to? So, structured, unstructured, etc. And so again, the variety of data adds complexity to the kind of questions that potentially your end users want to answer, and therefore how do they get to that information? And so thinking about that and thinking about how you manage that. And then lastly, really the velocity. And I think this is kind of one of the most interesting in terms of people's capacity to use this data in ultimately, what I said before, from a volume perspective, in a timely fashion. So it's great that you might have a billion records of data, but if it takes you 2 to 3 days to do analysis on that, you may lose opportunities out of that. So the question is, for how you want to implement big data and how it's important to your organization, you need to think about the timeliness of this. So can I react to changes in my information in a way that adds value to my business? Doesn't need to be batch, doesn't need to be real time, is it streaming information? So there's lots of questions there that really you need to think through, again, from a perspective of your organization and what you're trying to achieve from your big data solution. And ultimately, big data, and this is specifically thinking about drawing it back to sort of general use case scenarios, it's not ultimately for everyone. So when we think about the solutions that exist, and in particular, if you're thinking, as an example, say a Hadoop environment, it's not just about ultimately the data scientists. We need to think about solutions that are broad spectrum, that cater to decision makers and data consumers within the organization and anchored in the real world. And so one of the big things certainly that we see from a front end perspective at Yellowfin is that often there's a focus on the data analyst, that when organizations think about BI, they're really thinking about data analysts. And ultimately it needs to be expanded. We need to think much more broadly about who are the consumers of the data. Is it going to, am I going to be providing analytics into my supply chain? So will my suppliers be able to see, as an example, what my sales are so that they can actually change their production line before I start making orders, as an example? Am I providing data into my client base? Am I adding value into the relationship I have with my customers by giving them highly tuned data? And so we can, once we start to think about that, we can see that the potential body of individuals who could use your data could be quite vast. And so you do need to think about how the big data solution fits into that again. Where's the value being generated from your data? Who needs to get to it? Is it from a marketing perspective, is it your salespeople, or is it much broader than that? Is it your customers? Is it your suppliers, etc.? And so, how do you get it into the hands of those people over time? So if we think about who's benefiting from big data, a recent study sort of really highlights some of the sort of the broad segments, if you like, that are really looking to get value out of the big data story. And one of the most interesting is obviously the marketing case study. So we're seeing, I think, with big data, one of the really big shifts that is occurring is the emphasis of into from away from, say, finance traditionally, so BI being a finance kind of function, into more of a marketing function. And we see a number of these within here. So customer segmentation, sales and market opportunities, automated real-time decision processes. And so we're seeing quite a shift away from sort of the traditional BI space, if you like. And that to me is really interesting and really quite fascinating. And what it says is that there's this untapped market within organizations that really, they haven't had an opportunity to use traditional BI because it didn't really fit their needs. But the big data story now really helps some new parts of the organization excel and do far, far better than they did before. So I find that to be really, really interesting. And again, so when you think about big data, think about all the possible case studies that exist within your own organization. And it's again, typically we think, do you have to be a web? Do you have to be a telco? Well, you don't. You can be in a multitude of industries. And again, here another study of the value index. You can see in government, manufacturing, utilities, especially around smart metering, healthcare providers, health records. There is, when you start to tap into it and think about it, there's very few industries that wouldn't benefit out of a big data solution. And I think that again is one of the really exciting components, is that it's not just a really finely sliced product in that sense. And so why bother? Well, if we think about it and we think about where we are today, this is probably the most telling, is that 60% of organizations collect more data than they effectively use. And so, more than half of organizations are not really using the data they collect very well. And so big data is about doing that. Big data is about taking the data you have and being able to use it really effectively to add value to your business. 70% of organizations see big data as a huge business opportunity, and they should. I mean, it really is opening up organizations' eyes to what they can do with data, how they can add value to their business. And again, off the back of this, in terms of the investment stream, 70% of organizations believe they'll get an ROI within a year. So, big data solutions should really be anchored in the real world in terms of getting a return on your investment as quickly as possible, adding value into your business as quickly as possible. And lastly, and this is the most telling one, 84% of organizations that do use big data say they now make better business decisions. And so that to me is one of the sort of overwhelming stats. If we can think about BI and we're thinking about using data effectively, ultimately it's to make better business decisions, whether they be automated, etc. But the reality is, we're looking for improvement, and this is an overwhelming number. So that to me is one of the sort of big key drivers, and very, very exciting part of the big data story. So on that, that's me for the introduction. I'd like to now hand over to Fred Gallagher, and Fred is going to take us through some of the best practices and sort of get more into the detail about some of the things I've touched on.
Well, again, thanks a lot, Glenn, and thanks to all the folks attending the webinar today. I'm responsible for the VectorWise business, and what I wanted to talk to you about today are best practices, and I'm going to base this on our experience in engaging hundreds of customers with our analytical database, VectorWise. But first, what is big data? Everybody's talking about it. Even Dilbert here and his boss are talking about big data, and that's because the promise of big data is absolutely huge. And so, the question is, how do you separate the real conversations from the hype? You have a number of industry analysts and consultants such as McKinsey that have identified opportunities that measure in the trillions of dollars. And even here, if you read the cartoon, you can see that Dilbert's pointy-haired boss thinks that big data could save them. And so, to me, putting the tongue-in-cheek cartoon aside, what I assert in terms of big data is that there is a great opportunity. However, the current technologies were not designed to take advantage of that opportunity, nor are the business processes, either from an IT perspective or from a business perspective, designed to take advantage of that opportunity. And then finally, you also have a set of skills that were really that people have built up around the older traditional technologies. And so the meatier conversation from my perspective is, how do we align the technology, processes, and skills to take advantage of this huge opportunity in big data? So the first thing I start with many of our prospects and customers is, focus on your outcome. What is it you want to achieve from a business perspective before we dive into the technology? If you're in healthcare, you may be trying to prevent disease. If you're in business, it may be about growing revenue or increasing profits. And so those are your key goals. And inside of that, again, I come back to, my assertion is big data is capable of transforming your business. And many times in business, that means achieving greater revenue, taking advantage of opportunities in the market. The sort of caution that I would have is around the potential pitfall of technologies that don't have a clear connection to business value. I typically see folks that have that clear connection to business value, their projects are more successful, and they move much faster along that payback dimension. And Glenn had talked about the importance of having a payback in a one-year period. The big data levers inside of how you can transform your business. There's a number of these. Let me just kind of highlight, with a story here associated to marketing, which Glenn had mentioned. One of our customers is Badu. They are a social network company, actually a social dating company, and they have over 150 million members in their social network. And every day the marketing team, not the data scientists, but the marketing team analyzes a set of 10 billion records that are related to the connections and the behaviors of the members. And what they're trying to do is analyze those connections and behaviors to determine how effective their marketing campaigns have been in terms of monetizing the network for Badu itself or for helping their advertising partners. And many of these, much of their queries, I think their standard query, all of them run in less than 30 seconds, and most of them run in less than 10 seconds. And so that makes it usable for that Badu marketing team to understand how to market directly to people, which goes to the personalization and the social aspect. The next point, identify the data you have and identify the data you need. And the point that I'd make here is, ask yourself the question, what additional data is required outside of the corporate data that you have in your organization? Your organization's data is very valuable, and it can be enriched and very much enhanced by adding external data. And that is one way to turn that data that you have internally even into greater value. Second question that I typically ask is on the corporate data, and this starts to get into a field that I call sometimes corporate governance. And what that is oftentimes the people that need data to make a business decision, that are analyzing it or reviewing a report, are not necessarily the people that own the data. Somebody else in the organization might have authority and responsibility for that data. And so this is a topic about the business process or the IT process that can come into play in an organization. So again, when collecting the data, I always reference back to best practice number 1, which is make sure we focus on what outcome we want to accomplish. And in that sense, let me also kind of discuss another customer story. We have a retail customer here in the United States on the East Coast by the name of Sheets. They have stores from Pittsburgh to Raleigh, North Carolina, over 400 of them. And they started using VectorWise to analyze their daily point of sale data coming off of the cash registers. And then what they've added to that in terms of the data that they want to analyze is more what I would put in that far box up here that's called big data. What they've started doing is adding what we call environmental data. They own all of their stores. And what they're trying to do is correlate what's going on in the store from an environmental perspective, be it the temperature in the refrigerator, the temperature outside, to sales in the store, or even losses associated with food spoilage. And so that gives you an example of how somebody started with a project around sales data. It was very structured, and then started analyzing other data to deliver outcomes for their business. Third best practice, use the right big data tool for the job. And another bit of a tongue-in-cheek cartoon here is related to Hadoop. And I think there's probably many of you in the audience today that are using or are considering using Hadoop, and it may be something that you equate to big data itself. Let me give you a couple observations on my experiences with Hadoop, and we have dozens of customers and prospects that have experience with Hadoop, and we have interaction with those with deployments that are Hadoop. And Hadoop makes a fantastic data store. It's almost an infinite capability of storage for data that it's fault tolerant, and it provides very good batch I/O. Some other aspects of Hadoop, while it's great at a batch perspective, it's not so great from a response time. It has flexibility in terms of programming, but on the flip side of that, there's programming skills that are required to take advantage of that flexibility, and they're not your traditional BI tool or SQL skills that many of you may have built up over the years. And so really you need to think of big data as being not just Hadoop, it's something bigger. As a matter of fact, our sort of perception is that it's a very large ecosystem focused on the 3 V's of volume, variety, and velocity that Glenn had covered, and I would add to that complexity. And any individual project that your organization may be taking on, you're only going to focus on a subset of this ecosystem. And today in our discussion, we're really focused on that red box up there, which I oftentimes refer to as reporting, ad hoc query, analytics. And we've intentionally drawn this connecting into Hadoop because there is a way that analytical databases and reporting projects can connect into Hadoop through an analytical database. And so I just wanted to kind of give you our perspective there on big data. And what we're really talking about today is delivering reporting and analytics in what I call a real-time or even a relevant time perspective so that you can address problems in the amount of time that the business needs. And for that, we move to best practice number 4, which is use a fast database. And there's a number of studies that have been done in this area of the implications of either slow query performance or value received by enhancing query performance. And you can see the studies here from BARC, B-A-R-C, TDWI, as well as Gartner that are highlighting the fact that slow query performance is recognized as a problem, and BARC has even gone so far as to show that greater business value can be realized by speeding that up. We're not just talking about people that are complaining about slow queries. They can actually demonstrate by improving the performance, companies realize greater value. One of my opinions relates to user expectations. One of my colleagues says, hey Fred, we live in the age of Google. If you go back to when I started working, we had a desktop, we didn't have laptops, and it was very much a batch processing or time sharing world where we'd start a job and then we could walk away and get a cup of coffee and come back and the job was still running. And then the browser came into the world and we could open up a few browsers and run multiple jobs at the same time and multitask. And in that world, we're talking about response times that are up in the top here. Sub 10 seconds was really the objective. Well, today, we're down in this lower world. We're using mobile devices, be it the iPad or the iPhone. And when does someone use a mobile device? Well, it's when they're on the go, in the moment, and they're usually focusing on one application, and they want it to be interactive and engaging, and they want the answer now. And so really a handful of seconds is what users are expecting. And frankly, that allows more people, more managers, and actually more executives will start using these technologies. Again, using a fast database, the right tool. We have an analogy here related to traditional databases that sort of one tool for everything. If you know how to use a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And then on the right-hand side, we have clustered databases that are good for what I call batch processing. But in the middle, we talk about here are analytical databases, which were purpose-built for slicing and dicing through data. They're quick and agile, and they allow for that fast response time that users are demanding. Last point on this best practice is considering the hidden costs. What we see is the data infrastructure, the database, the platform associated with it is just one layer in the stack to deliver business value. And we talk to folks about this quite a bit because these have big implications. And just take example, the hardware cost. In many tests, we've seen that we're able to deliver much greater performance on a much smaller form factor. That has implications for customers, not just in the cost of the software, but the cost of the hardware, the cost of the electricity to run that hardware, and then also the number of people to manage the hardware. And then moving over to my lower point there, a database that has a lot of performance headroom, organizations spend less time tuning the database. Let's get out of this conversation of developing aggregates, cubes, and complex schemas. If you're someone that's implementing a data infrastructure solution or a BI project, having to explain to your boss or your boss's boss about a cube or an aggregate is not a conversation they're interested in saying, here's where I'm spending my day. If you're able to show them the value of the product and we're able to deliver it in a very short time frame, that's a better conversation to be having with those folks. Plan for mixed architecture. I think we've hit on this one a little bit in some of the stories I've told, but let me give you another one, because what we've seen with many of our customers is they'll start with this project in the middle, which is what we call transactional data. So point of sale data, product data that's in your ERP system. And then from there, they want to add external data, be it something down here in the social world, or maybe it's machine data or log data that's in Hadoop. And bringing those data sets together and analyzing them in a fast database is a way that companies can realize value. And I'll give you an example here. We have a customer, Is Cool Entertainment. They're a leading social gaming site on Facebook with millions of monthly visitors. And what they've done is they've integrated some of their transactional data with log data that comes from Hadoop. And the reason they're doing that is to gain analytics so that they can tailor specific offerings to customers and advertisers, and thereby have a better, what they call, monetization of their gaming efforts. So that's an example, but I would let you know that this additional data, these new data sets in this mixed architecture, is one that's coming at us quite frequently, and so I would encourage you to investigate this in your projects. The sixth best practice that we have is ensure mass distribution of your data. And again, this comes back to sort of a corollary to the point I was making about the user response time. The devices that people are using today are these ones down at the bottom. And when you have a device such as this that has compute power that can go virtually anywhere, that somebody can get a 4G connection or even a 3G, you're going to have more people accessing the system, and more folks are going to be doing that in a concurrent fashion. Another point, go back to the BARC survey. They've shown another way that companies gain tremendous value is by having more people in the organization utilizing the technology, using BI technology, which is kind of, makes sense. Organizations don't want to limit their big data tools and the big data value to just a few. It's really the opportunity here is to arm as many of the people in your organization that you need to take advantage of this and to help solve business problems, because that's what it's about. It shouldn't just be relegated to the area of a few. And so with that, let me turn to the last business practice. And at this point, I'm actually going to turn this one back over to Glenn Robbie to wrap up this specific best practice.
So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about tailoring data delivery to each audience, and it goes, I suppose, ultimately to the heart of what we've been talking about today. Is that ultimately you have a plethora of people within your organization who can get value out of big data, and thinking about how to deliver that data to each of those. And so by that we mean really understanding each of your audience's use cases. What are they wanting to do? So are they senior management who are looking at KPIs, who are really wanting to be able to track the business and be able to get to the detail behind that? Do they want to have a lot of location intelligence? So in Fred's example with store data, being able to understand customer demographics by region, by store, to understand where the best territories are, how to optimize store performance, how to put new stores in place. So for that level of detail, you've got very much a delivery capacity around thinking about who's going to be receiving that information and how they'll use it, and what visualizations make sense. Certainly around interactive reporting. So we want to make sure that we've got reports that are as interactive as possible for people who are in the line, who are slicing and dicing, who are analyzing the data to make decisions. And then lastly, sort of collaborative. Is it more for data consumers? Is it people within your organization who want to be able to share this information, talk about it, and overlay human knowledge onto the data? And that collaborative aspect is actually very, very important. The one thing data does is tell us facts. The one thing people do is really overlay and give context to those facts. And so how information is shared, how people talk about it, how people use it, is really, really critical in terms of making use of your big data. So, and to sort of drive that home, from a visualization perspective, why turn it into a chart? Well, if we look at this data, if we query a whole lot of people and say, what does this look like? Well, 169 people say it looks like Pac-Man. The other 41 don't. But it becomes a lot more clear when you actually look at the visualization. And so people's capacity to see data, to visualize it, is very, very critical. In the past, Often data was just shipped as reams of data, long reams of reports. So building in highly interactive visual dashboards, etc., is what turns data and makes it come to life a lot more usable. So in terms of visualization tips, really thinking about if you've got a lot of data, you need to be very, very focused. So you need to think about the audience. You need to think about what it is that they need to do their jobs better. And so one of the things that certainly we talk about when building dashboards and visualizations is to really tailor each of those specifically to the user, to the use case that you're seeking to meet. So it is often tempting, just because we've got the data, let's build some more reports. But with every one of them, think about, will a person be able to act on it? Will they be able to use this information to make better decisions and to do their job well? And in that sense, less is more. Giving people highly tailored, very, very relevant visualizations is far more important than just giving them everything that they can use. The interactivity is where it really comes into it. So now that I've built a dashboard out for someone, I want to make it interactive. And I think one of the great things about big data and the big data solutions is that we can build this interactivity. In the past, dashboards and reports were static because of the very nature of the batch process of creating them. Now, because they can be real-time, they can be hitting an analytical database, we can really allow people to slice and dice this information. And so if I see a blip in a trend, I can drill into that. I can start to slice and dice it. I can really analyze it. That's what makes people and the interactivity so essential. Obviously selecting the right metrics, and again, this comes back to less is more, but really making sure that people have the right metrics that are appropriate for what they're trying to do and what they can act on. So for a good example, does it really help to give an operational manager profitability report for the whole company? How much control does that person have on profitability? So building in metrics that people can actually act on, that's part of their role is very, very critical. And within that context, so often it doesn't help to give just one metric, but you want to have a multi-dimensional view of it. You want to see this in multiple ways so that a user can actually understand what's happening in the organization, what's driving that metric, etc. And lastly, you want to really support and prompt action. So again, the collaboration component about how do people actually then interact with it. Can they email this out at a simple level? Can they comment on it? Can they add value to that information? And these are the things that really make ultimately big data so much more critical and usable within organizations, ultimately. So what we're going to do now is just give you an example of a big data scenario. So I'm going to take you through into a very quick demonstration. So this is Yellowfin running on top of a Vectorwise database. This is, I'm connecting to a server in the US, I'm sitting in Australia, and I'm about to browse 1 billion rows of data. So, this is what if I'm going to get excited, and I do get excited by this stuff, what I really appreciate is the fact that as a manager, I can now look at my data, and in the past, I would have struggled to see what was sitting below this. So if I'm looking at Europe, there's an outlier here. I can click on Europe and say, let me see the detail sitting behind this. And I can open that up, and I can very quickly go through these billion records and start to look at them by time, etc. And so, without me having to go and ask someone in IT to build a new report for me, to show me the information, I can simply get there. And so that level of drill is one example, but again, I could be drilling down hierarchies. And again, thinking about this is 1 billion rows of data, and I'm doing this and talking to and really being able to do this almost in real time. And in this case here, I've got an analytical drill, so it's a drill anywhere. This type of drill is again what we're talking about, is that we now can give people the kind of interactivity that lets me drill into any segment of my data. So now I'm interested in by product name for electronics, and so I can really look at that. I can see it's the Mac, and again, so I'm interested in some more detail around these numbers, but I can keep just drilling to my heart's content, and that is the point about this kind of interactivity, is that even though I'm interacting with 1 billion rows of data, I can do that in near real time. I don't need assistance from IT. I don't need a data mart that sits behind that has pre-aggregated all those results for me, and that's what makes it so rich and so powerful. And obviously, I'm getting it in a way that I can consume. So I'm seeing it in the dashboard structure. I'm seeing multiple metrics that support my business, but each of them are providing me with drill down capability. And we do have other examples where we can filter and do all those sorts of things. But the point here really being is just the speed in which I'm going to get feedback from my queries. And that's what's really, truly exciting. So, the point of today's webinar was not to really sort of demonstrate product too much. But let's get back into sort of some of the things that we're talking about. So, to reiterate, the best practices, the top 7, really focus on what you want to achieve. And I think that is very hard is the first thing, because I think in understanding what you want to do, you're going to be driving a multitude of solutions and really identifying what you want. Getting the right data, using the right big data tool for the job. So again, understanding what you need, the data you have, and selecting the appropriate infrastructure. From an analytical perspective, from a BI perspective, obviously use a fast database. And I think with what we've seen, just briefly then with the VectorWise product, it's certainly very, very fast. Plan for mixed architecture. Again, depending on the chances are that you won't just have one basic use case that you're looking to achieve. You'll have multiple. So think about how all these moving parts will interact with one another. Ensure mass distribution. So to maximize the volume of value of your data, get it into the hands of as many people as possible. That's the most critical. And lastly, tailored data delivery to each audience. So, thinking about what does everyone need, how do they need it. Don't just give them the same pre-packaged result. Really think about each use case, what they want to achieve with it, and build out tailored content for those users. If you've got any further questions, any follow-up, please don't hesitate to contact either Actian or Yellowfin. So thank you, and thank you, Fred.
Thanks a lot, Glenn.